The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Oak Ridge, Colorado, as Penelope Davis clutched her wedding band in trembling fingers, fighting back tears that threatened to spill onto her hollowed cheeks. Hunger gnawed at her insides, a relentless companion these past 3 weeks since her husband's passing, and the gold circle that had once symbolized eternal love now represented her last hope for survival. Penelope had never imagined life would bring her to such desperate straits. At 26, she was now a widow in a town that had once held so much promise. The year was 1875, and the West was supposed to be a land of opportunity. That's what Thomas had told her when they'd left their comfortable life in Boston 3 years ago. Her husband had dreams of starting a cattle ranch, but typhoid fever had taken him before those dreams could truly take root. The little money they'd saved had gone to the doctor's bills and Thomas's burial. Now, with winter approaching and not a penny to her name, Penelope had made the heartbreaking decision to part with her most precious possession. She pushed open the door to Harmon's General Store, the little bell announcing her arrival. The familiar scent of coffee beans, leather, and dried goods filled her nostrils, making her empty stomach clench painfully. "Mrs. Davis," Mr. Harmon nodded from behind the counter. His eyes flickered to her hand where she still clutched the wedding band. "What can I do for you today?" Penelope approached slowly, dignity straightening her spine despite the threadbare quality of her dress. "I was wondering if you might be interested in purchasing this." She placed the gold band on the counter, the simple circle catching the light from the store windows. "Mr. Harmon's expression softened with pity. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Davis, I don't really deal in jewelry." "Please," Penelope whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need bread, just enough to get through the week until I can find work." The storekeeper picked up the ring, examining it briefly. "It's a fine piece, but I haven't the cash to spare. Perhaps try the assayer's office or wait for the stage to bring a proper jeweler through town." "I cannot wait that long," Penelope admitted, the words burning her throat with shame. The bell above the door jingled again, and both turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He stepped inside, and Penelope recognized him as one of the cowboys who worked at the Carson Ranch outside of town. She'd seen him ride through occasionally but had never spoken to him. "Afternoon, Jackson," Mr. Harmon called. "Your order came in yesterday." "Much obliged," the cowboy responded, his voice deep and even. He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair and sun-weathered features. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, took in the scene before him, lingering on the gold band still resting on the counter. Penelope reached for her ring, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Excuse me," she murmured, preparing to leave. "Wait," the cowboy Jackson said. He approached the counter with measured steps. "You're selling your wedding band," Penelope stiffened. "My circumstances are my own concern, sir." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No disrespect intended, madam. I'm Jackson Miller." He glanced at the ring again. "How much are you asking for it?" "Just enough for bread and essentials," she replied quietly. $5 would see me through a while." Jackson studied her face, taking in the hollow cheeks and determined eyes. Without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out $10 and placed it on the counter. "That's too much," Penelope protested. "It's a fair price," Jackson insisted. "Gold's worth more than $5. Mr. Harmon busied himself with arranging goods on a nearby shelf, pretending not to listen. Penelope stared at the money, torn between desperate need and pride. "Thank you," she finally said, taking the bills with trembling fingers. Jackson picked up the wedding band, examining it in the light. It was a simple gold circle, unadorned but well-crafted. He watched as Penelope selected bread, flour, beans, and a small cut of salt pork, the barest essentials to keep hunger at bay. As she prepared to leave, purchases bundled in brown paper, Jackson approached her again. "Mrs. Davis," she supplied. "Penelope Davis, Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice gentle. "I believe this belongs to you." He held out the wedding band, confusion crossed her features. "But you purchased it fairly." "I did," he agreed, "and now I'm giving it back." Before she could protest further, he took her left hand and slipped the ring back onto her finger. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Penelope found herself speechless. "Why?" she finally managed. Jackson replaced his hat, his eyes never leaving hers. "Some things shouldn't be sold out of desperation. Keep it to remember him by." With that, he tipped his hat and turned to conduct his business with Mr. Harmon, leaving Penelope standing by the door, staring at the ring now back on her finger. Tears threatening once more, but for entirely different reasons. Penelope walked home in a daze, the paper-wrapped bundle clutched to her chest. The small cabin she had shared with Thomas sat on the edge of town, its weathered boards and sagging porch a far cry from the grand home they had planned to build once the ranch was established. Inside, she carefully placed her purchases on the rough wooden table and sank into the single chair. Her thumb absently rubbed the wedding band, now back where it had been since her wedding day 4 years ago. The kindness of the stranger Jackson Miller was overwhelming in a world that had shown her little mercy of late. That night, as she ate a simple meal of bread and beans, Penelope found herself thinking of the cowboy's blue eyes and the gentleness with which he had slipped the ring back onto her finger. It had been an intimate gesture from a stranger, yet somehow it hadn't felt improper. It had felt like hope. 2 days later, Penelope was hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Jackson Miller approached on a chestnut gelding, leading a second horse laden with supplies. "Mrs. Davis," he called, removing his hat as he dismounted. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Miller," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you out this way? Call me Jackson, please," he gestured to the second horse. "I spoke with Pastor Williams. He mentioned you might be looking for work." Penelope nodded cautiously. "I've been asking around town. I can sew, cook, clean, whatever honest work is available. Mrs. Carson, my employer's wife, is looking for help with household duties at the ranch," Jackson explained. 3 days a week, fair wages. I told her about you and she asked if you might be interested." Hope surged in Penelope's chest. "I would be very interested. When could I start?" "Tomorrow, if you're able." He hesitated, then continued. "It's 5 miles to the ranch. I brought a horse you can use. She's gentle, belonged to Mrs. Carson's niece before she moved back east." Penelope stared at the mare, a pretty dappled gray with kind eyes. "I couldn't possibly accept. It's not a gift," Jackson clarified quickly. "Just a loan to help you get to and from the ranch. Mrs. Carson insists her staff arrive fresh enough to work, not exhausted from walking miles." His thoughtfulness struck her again. "Thank you, that's very kind." Jackson unloaded the supplies from the pack horse, a sack of flour, potatoes, coffee, and other staples. "Mrs. Carson also sent these ahead, part of your first week's wages. But I haven't earned them yet," Penelope protested. Jackson's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Mrs. Carson can be stubborn. Best not to argue with her." After showing Penelope how to care for the mare and arranging to escort her to the ranch the following morning, Jackson prepared to leave. At the edge of her yard, he turned back. "Mrs. Davis, may I ask a personal question?" Penelope nodded, curious. "How long has your husband been gone?" The question stung, but she answered honestly. 3 weeks, typhoid." Jackson's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss." "My father died of the same when I was 16. It's a cruel disease," Penelope said softly. "That it is." He replaced his hat, tipping it slightly. "I'll come by at 7 tomorrow." As she watched him ride away, Penelope felt a strange fluttering in her chest, something she hadn't felt since before Thomas fell ill. The sensation troubled her, bringing waves of guilt. Her husband was barely cold in his grave, and yet here she was, noticing the kindness in another man's eyes. True to his word, Jackson arrived promptly at 7 the next morning. The ride to the Carson Ranch was filled with Jackson pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his 8 years working the ranch. Penelope found herself laughing for the first time in months at his tale of trying to teach the ranch owner's young son to rope a calf. The Carson Ranch sprawled across rolling hills, a white 2-story house commanding a view of the valley. Mrs. Carson, a plump, energetic woman in her 40s, welcomed Penelope warmly and quickly set her to work helping with laundry, baking, and mending. By day's end, Penelope's hands were raw, but her heart was lighter. Having honest work and fair pay brought back a measure of dignity she had feared lost forever. As she prepared to leave, Jackson appeared at the kitchen door. "I'll ride back with you," he offered. "There have been reports of wolves in the area." On the journey home, with the setting sun painting the plains in gold and crimson, Jackson shared more of himself. He had come west at 18, working his way from ranch hand to foreman. He spoke of his dreams to have his own land someday, to build something lasting. "What about you, Mrs. Davis?" he asked. "What were your dreams when you came west?" Penelope considered the question. "Thomas and I wanted a cattle ranch, children running in the yard, a life of our own making. He had such grand plans. And now," she sighed, "now I just want to survive." Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Surviving is a start. The rest can come later." In the weeks that followed, Penelope settled into a routine. 3 days at the Carson Ranch, where her duties expanded to include cooking and occasionally caring for Mrs. Carson's youngest child. The other days, she took in mending from townspeople and tended her small garden, preparing for winter. Jackson often escorted her to and from the ranch, their conversations growing deeper with each journey. She learned about his younger sister in St. Louis, his years working cattle drives to Kansas City, his love of books that surprised many who knew him only as a cowboy. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her courtship with Thomas, the hopes they had brought west with them. Speaking of Thomas became easier, the sharp pain of loss gradually softening to a gentle ache. One evening in late October, as they approached her cabin, Jackson cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Davis, Penelope, there's a harvest dance in town this Saturday. I was wondering if you might consider attending. With me." Penelope's heart leaped, then plummeted. The idea of stepping out socially with another man so soon after Thomas's death seemed improper, even scandalous. Yet something in Jackson's hopeful expression made her hesitate before refusing. "I don't know if that would be appropriate," she said carefully. "It's only been 2 months since." "As friends," Jackson clarified quickly. "Nothing improper, just 2 people enjoying music and company." Still, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but the gossips in town would have a field day." "I can't bear to have Thomas's memory dishonored that way." Jackson nodded, disappointment evident in his eyes but respect in his voice. "I understand. Perhaps another time." That night, Penelope twisted her wedding band around her finger, torn between loyalty to a ghost and the undeniable feelings growing for the man who had shown her such kindness. Was it a betrayal to feel this way so soon? Or would Thomas, who had always wanted her happiness above all else, understand? The following week brought early snow, blanketing the plains in white. Penelope awoke one morning to find her woodpile nearly depleted and the path to town impassable on foot. Worry gnawed at her. Without wood, the bitter cold would soon penetrate her small cabin's thin walls. By midday, the sound of an axe splitting wood drew her to the window. There stood Jackson, methodically building her a substantial woodpile. She hurried outside, wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," she called. Jackson paused, leaning on the axe handle. "Neither should you, which is why you need wood." He nodded toward the gray mare in her makeshift shelter. "Brought feed for her too." "Snow's too deep for you to make it to town." Penelope invited him inside for coffee once he finished, grateful for both the wood and the company. As they sat at her small table, warming their hands on tin cups, she finally asked the question that had lingered in her mind. "Why are you doing all this for me, Jackson?" He considered her question seriously. At first, it was simple human kindness. No one should have to sell their wedding band for bread. His blue eyes met hers. "But now I do it because I care what happens to you." The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "I'm still in mourning." "I know," he said gently. "And I respect that. I'm not asking for anything but the chance to help when I can." That night, after Jackson had gone, Penelope sat by the fire he had built, staring at the wedding band on her finger. For the first time since slipping it on, she removed it, holding it in her palm. Thomas had placed it there with promises of forever cut tragically short. What would he want for her now? The winter of 1875 proved harsh, with blizzards sweeping across the plains and temperatures dropping so low that cattle froze where they stood. Jackson checked on Penelope frequently, bringing supplies, clearing snow from her roof when it threatened to collapse, and keeping her woodpile stocked. Christmas approached, and Mrs. Carson insisted Penelope join them for dinner. The warmth of the Carson family, ranch hands, and neighbors eased some of the loneliness that had settled in her heart. Jackson sat beside her at the long table, their shoulders occasionally brushing, sending warmth through her that had nothing to do with the roaring fireplace. After dinner, as carols were sung and punch was served, Jackson led her to a quiet corner. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "Jackson, you shouldn't have, it's nothing grand," he assured her. Penelope unwrapped the simple brown paper to reveal a delicate silver chain. "It's beautiful, but I can't accept, it was my mother's," he explained. "I thought, for your wedding band, when you're ready to take it off your finger but not ready to put it away completely." Tears filled her eyes at his understanding. "Thank you." In that moment, looking into his kind blue eyes, Penelope felt something shift inside her like a frozen river beginning to thaw in spring. January brought more snow and a terrifying night when Penelope developed a fever that left her delirious. Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring farm discovered her during a welfare check and sent her son running for the doctor. By the time Dr. Wilson arrived, Jackson was already there, having heard the news in town. For 3 days, Jackson barely left her side, helping the doctor administer medicine, placing cool cloths on her forehead, and ensuring she drank broth when she could. Through the haze of fever, Penelope was aware of his constant presence, his deep voice reading from her Bible when she couldn't sleep, his strong hands adjusting her blankets. When the fever finally broke and clarity returned, she found Jackson dozing in a chair beside her bed, his face drawn with exhaustion. The sight stirred something profound in her heart. "You stayed," she whispered. He woke instantly, relief flooding his features. "Of course I stayed." It was then, weak from illness but clear in mind, that Penelope acknowledged the truth she had been fighting. She was falling in love with Jackson Miller. As February turned to March and the first hints of spring appeared, Penelope faced another crisis. The owner of her small cabin arrived to inform her that he had sold the property. The new owner would arrive in April and wanted the cabin for his foreman. "You have 3 weeks to vacate," he told her, not unkindly but firmly. Panic gripped her. Where would she go? The wages from the Carson ranch weren't enough to buy property, and rental homes in Oakridge were scarce. When Jackson learned of her situation, he rode immediately to her cabin. "I might have a solution," he said, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been saving to buy land. Last month I purchased 100 acres about 2 miles south of the Carson place. There's a cabin small but sturdy." "That's wonderful, Jackson," Penelope said, genuinely happy for him despite her own troubles. He took a deep breath. "Penelope, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." The proposal caught her completely off guard. "Your wife, Jackson, I know it's sudden," he hurried on, "and I know you're still healing, but I care for you deeply. I believe we could build a good life together." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not asking you to forget Thomas, I would never expect that." Penelope pulled her hand away, overwhelmed. "I need time to think." Jackson nodded, standing to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Take all the time you need. The offer of the cabin stands regardless of your answer. I won't see you without a home." After he left, Penelope sat for hours, her emotions in turmoil. Marriage to Jackson would solve her immediate problems, but was that reason enough? And what of her feelings for Thomas? Was it possible to love again without dishonoring his memory? That night, she removed her wedding band and for the first time placed it on the silver chain Jackson had given her. She hung it around her neck, the gold circle resting against her heart. It felt right somehow, keeping Thomas close while making space for a new chapter. The next day, she rode to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. Thomas's grave was simple, marked with a wooden cross until she could afford a proper headstone. Penelope knelt beside it, tracing his name with her fingers. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "Jackson is a good man. He's been so kind to me, to us, really, since he bought back your ring." She touched the band now hanging from the chain. "I think I'm falling in love with him, Thomas. Is that a betrayal? Would you hate me for it? Only the soft spring breeze answered, rustling the new grass growing over the grave. Yet somehow, Penelope felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thomas had always wanted her happiness above all else. He wouldn't want her to live alone, struggling to survive when love and security were being offered. 2 days later, she rode to the Carson ranch and asked one of the hands where she might find Jackson. He directed her to the south pasture where Jackson was mending fences. He saw her approaching and set down his tools, wiping his brow as she dismounted. "Penelope, is everything all right?" She nodded, suddenly nervous. "I've been thinking about your proposal." Jackson's expression grew serious. "And, before I give my answer, I need to know something." She stepped closer, looking directly into his eyes. "Why did you really buy back my wedding band that day in the store?" A slight smile touched his lips. "The truth, I couldn't bear to see the pain in your eyes when you placed it on the counter. It felt wrong that someone who clearly loved so deeply should have to part with something so meaningful." "You didn't even know me," she pointed out. "No," he agreed. "But I knew suffering when I saw it, and I knew I wanted to ease yours, even in that small way." Penelope took a deep breath. "My answer is yes, Jackson, I will marry you." Joy spread across his features, but he tempered it with understanding. "Are you certain?" "I don't want you to agree out of necessity." "It began as necessity," she admitted honestly. "But it's grown into something more. I care for you deeply, Jackson. I can't promise I'm fully healed from losing Thomas, but I promise to bring my whole heart to our marriage day by day." Jackson closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "That's all I could ask for." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Oak Ridge. Mrs. Carson insisted on hosting a small reception at the ranch, where the hands presented them with a handmade quilt, and the Carson children scattered wildflowers around the yard. That evening, Jackson brought Penelope to their new home, the cabin on his land. He had worked tirelessly to prepare it, adding curtains at the windows, building new furniture, and ensuring every detail was ready for her arrival. As they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the plains in brilliant color, Jackson slipped his arm around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller." Penelope leaned into his embrace, her hand coming up to touch the wedding band that still hung on its chain around her neck. Tomorrow, she would wear a new ring, the one Jackson had placed on her finger that afternoon. But Thomas's band would remain close to her heart, a reminder of the love that had brought her west and the strength she had found in herself after losing him. "It feels right," she said softly, "being here with you." Jackson turned her gently to face him, his eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. "I promise to make a good life for us, Penelope, to honor your past while building our future." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Penelope felt the final pieces of her broken heart mending. Not erasing what had been, but creating something new and equally precious. By summer's end, Jackson and Penelope had transformed their 100 acres into the beginning of a promising ranch. They started small, a few cattle, chickens, a vegetable garden that thrived under Penelope's care. Each evening, they would sit on the porch swing Jackson had built, planning their future while watching the sunset. In late August, as they celebrated their 3rd month of marriage, Penelope presented Jackson with news that brought tears to his eyes. They would welcome a child in the spring. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Jackson placed his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked, covering his hand with her own. "For trusting me with your heart, for giving us this future." Penelope smiled in the darkness. "It was you who made it possible, the day you bought back my wedding band and slipped it on my finger. You gave me dignity when I had lost everything." "I never expected it would lead us here," Jackson admitted. "I just couldn't bear to see you in pain." "That's why I love you," she said softly. "Your kindness isn't calculated, it simply is." As autumn painted the plains in gold and crimson, their little ranch flourished. Jackson's skill with cattle and Penelope's careful management of their finances allowed them to purchase more land adjoining their property. The townspeople who had once whispered about the widow who remarried too quickly now spoke instead of the thriving Miller Ranch and its industrious owners. Penelope continued to wear Thomas's wedding band on its chain, but as her pregnancy progressed and her body changed, she found herself touching it less frequently. The past remained important, but the future, her life with Jackson, their coming child, the home they were building together, had become her focus. On a crisp April morning in 1876, exactly 1 year after Thomas's death, Penelope gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Elizabeth Grace. Jackson wept openly when the midwife placed the tiny bundle in his arms, his calloused fingers incredibly gentle as he traced his daughter's perfect features. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." As Penelope watched her husband with their daughter, overwhelming gratitude filled her heart. From the depths of despair, standing in Harmon's store prepared to sell her wedding band for bread, to this moment of pure joy, her journey had been one of both heartbreak and healing. That evening, as Elizabeth slept in the cradle Jackson had crafted, Penelope took the chain from around her neck. Thomas's wedding band gleamed in the lamplight as she held it in her palm. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, coming to sit beside her. "That life takes unexpected turns," she replied. "A year ago today, I buried Thomas. I thought my life was over." She looked up at Jackson, her eyes shining with tears and love. "I never imagined I could be this happy again." Jackson took her free hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Do you regret any of it, marrying me so soon after?" Penelope shook her head. "How could I regret the path that led to this happiness? Thomas would understand. He always said life was for the living." She placed the chain and ring in a small wooden box that contained other mementos of her first husband's letters, a pocket watch, a pressed flower from their wedding. Closing the lid, she set it on the shelf where it would remain honored but no longer around her neck. "I'll always love him," she said softly, "but my heart has grown large enough for both that love and what we share." Jackson gathered her in his arms, his strength and warmth enveloping her. "I wouldn't want it any other way." As their daughter grew, so did their ranch. By her 5th birthday, the Miller property had expanded to 500 acres with a herd of prize cattle and a reputation for quality that spread throughout Colorado territory. Elizabeth, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, became the joy of their lives, soon joined by twin brothers, Samuel and James. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Penelope would take out the wooden box and share stories with Jackson about Thomas, the good times, the dreams they had shared, the journey that had brought her west. And Jackson would listen, understanding that these memories were part of what had shaped the woman he loved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson presented Penelope with a locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children. As she admired the beautiful gift, he took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed there a decade before. "Do you ever think about that day in the general store?" he asked. "When I bought back your ring," Penelope smiled, the memory no longer painful. "Often. It was the day everything changed, though I didn't know it then." "I knew," Jackson admitted with a grin. "The moment I slipped that ring back on your finger, I felt something I'd never felt before, like my heart recognized yours somehow." Penelope leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. "Then I'm grateful for desperate times that led to such joy." As twilight settled over their prosperous ranch, with the laughter of their children still echoing from earlier festivities, Penelope and Jackson stood on the porch of the fine house they had built together. His arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, they watched the first stars appear in the vast Colorado sky. "We've come a long way from a desperate widow and a cowboy with $10 to spare," Jackson mused. "Yes," Penelope agreed, her heart full to bursting with contentment. "But I wouldn't change a single step of the journey." And as night fully embraced the land they had nurtured together, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that some endings were merely beginnings in disguise, and that the most precious gold wasn't found in wedding bands, but in the unexpected love that could bloom even in the harshest conditions of the Wild West.